On this episode of the Catholic Echo podcast from the Diocese of Youngstown, brought to you by the annual Diocesan Appeal and Cumulus Radio Youngstown, we're talking about the Diocesan Archive Museum with Bishop David Bonnar, Joan Lawson, and Hannah Shaw. Find more about this episode's topic, including articles from the Catholic Echo, at www.catholicecho.org/podcast. And now the host of the Catholic Echo podcast, Dennis Viviano.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Echo podcast. Today, we have some exciting news for you, something that's been in the works for months, if not years. A new diocesan archive facility in the works in Youngstown here. Here to tell you about it is Bishop David Bonnar. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Really excited to be here and to talk about this project.
Before we talk about that, first off, I want to ask you, Pope Francis has really stressed the importance of each diocese prioritizing archives and safekeeping of documents in really our tech-oriented world these days.
Absolutely, and the Holy Father is really just echoing canon law. There are some canons in the book and the Code of Canon Law that really point to this reality. For example, Canon 486 talks about how all documents which, with regard to dioceses or parishes, must be protected with the greatest care. And then in 491, the Canon 491, it states that a diocesan bishop is to take care that the acts and documents of the archives of cathedral, collegiate, parochial, and other churches in his territory are also diligently preserved, and that inventories or catalogs are made in duplicate, one of which is to be preserved in the archive of the church, and the other in the diocesan archive. It's really incumbent upon the bishop to ensure that not only the documents, but the patrimony of the church is protected and preserved.
Yes, and some of those documents, I got a sneak peek. A lot of them, beginning ones date to 1870, some on microfilm as well. What can you tell us about the St. Cyril and Methodius Church Archive Facility project?
When I arrived here in Youngstown, there was no intentional or organized effort behind the archives. We're looking at a number of years where there was just a lack of attention or activity. And that's problematic given the codes that I just mentioned, given the obligation of the bishop to make sure that we continue to preserve our history and tell our story, because if we stop telling our story, we become irrelevant. So with that in mind, we hired an archivist, we hired an associate archivist, and then we put together policies and procedures for archives. We repurposed a church as a warehouse for some of the liturgical items and artifacts and what have you, because there really was no designated place as such for those materials. And then we began to dream and plan and vision. And because the ultimate goal is to have an archival center, which is visible and which is welcoming for our faithful to come and to look, to see, to know, and to understand all the aspects of our history. And so we kind of fell upon St. Cyril Methodius Church, which has been closed. The basement has been utilized over the last few years to feed the poor. But the church, which is absolutely beautiful,
yes,
very historic, the windows, the stained glass windows, just a stunning place. And its location is kind of almost along Museum Row in downtown Youngstown. There's a proximity to what we would call the cultural district. And that became a perfect place for us to develop exhibits and have people come and see certain realities that we would change out from time to time, and even to engage in some research, certain parts of our history. Concomitant with that, though, we needed to develop a secure place, temperature-controlled vault to house many of the documents. Because if you don't do that properly, they can really lose their integrity, mold, moisture, what have you. So we looked at the rectory thinking we might be able to use that space, but the more we thought about it, we need to do this right. And so through our advisory councils, for example, through the consultors of the diocese, through our presbyteral council, through our finance council, we discussed this. And in the end, the recommendation was made that we raise that rectory and that we build initially a one-story vault along with archival offices. As we dove deeper into this, we thought, look, let's plan for the future. Let's make it a two-story so that we can build upon that. That's the plan right now, and we're just waiting for the final word from the city, and that's why we really haven't gone real public with this, because we want to respect the process.
And the goal is for the existing church exterior. You have some things that are going to be worked on there, interior as well. But as you mentioned, a community center for events and research. What will folks be able to research?
There'll be a staff there to assist them in this, but this could be baptismal certificates. It could be archival information about our schools and what have you. There's all kinds of possibilities.
Now, how will this project be funded?
We have a plan in place, and when we formally announce this, I think we'll be in a better position to announce how this funding is going to take place. It was kind of the way this unfolded was you can't help but see God's providence.
Now, what is your ultimate goal? Let's say we're a couple years out, and what do you want folks to take away from it?
Well, I think it's important for us not only to live in the moment and to prepare for the future, which we hope for each and every one of us is eternal life in heaven, but we stand on deep roots, a lasting legacy. And it's important for us to never, ever forget. You know, the book of Deuteronomy, it's biblical that we do this, says, "Be on your guard and be very careful not to forget the things your own eyes have seen, nor let them slip from your heart as long as you live, but to make them known to your children and to your children's children." And so it's important that we keep telling the story of our identity as a local church, the Diocese of Youngstown.
Make sure to keep posted here. In 2025, going to be a big year for the diocese. Bishop Bonnar, thanks so much. We will continue to keep you updated on this project online and on social media. Make sure to go to doy.org and follow our social media pages. Coming up next, I'll talk with Diocesan Chancellor Joan Lawson, who is behind the St. Cyril and Methodius Archive Center. Keep it here. Much more to come on the Catholic Echo podcast.
The Catholic Echo is the media arm of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown, and it seeks to inform and entertain Catholics in our 6-county diocese by forging stronger connections to our parish communities and highlighting the many blessings of Catholic life in our region. If you have a story idea for the Catholic Echo magazine, podcast, or website, send an email to catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org. We'd love to hear your ideas.
When storms hit, we are there to rebuild. As our neighbors age, we lighten their burdens. As our veterans adjust, we ease their transitions. In every part of the country, we are there. We are Catholic Charities. We serve millions each year regardless of their faith. We put food back on tables, unlock doors, and walk together on the road back. Help Catholic Charities serve your neighbors in need. Join us at wearethere.us.
Bishop David Bonnar has prioritized an archive facility project for the Diocese of Youngstown since 2022, stressing the importance of the Catholic Church preserving its rich history that dates back more than 200 years.
There's a few canons in the Code of Canon Law that speak about the importance of protecting and preserving church documents, not to mention the patrimony of the church. And it's really incumbent upon the local bishop to ensure that this is happening.
Diocese Chancellor and Archivist Joan Lawson is leading the project and will be aided by Assistant Archivist Hannah Shaw. Lawson says while active parishes will still hold their own sacramental records, the new archives facility is aiming to preserve records of parishes that have closed, in addition to records of diocesan offices and other Catholic organizations. Diocesan archives from 1943 through 1978 are currently being housed at Kent State University. All will be moved to a newly constructed, climate-controlled facility next to the church on East Wood Street in Youngstown.
To keep that humidity controlled as tightly as possible, make sure that those records can be preserved for generations. And you know, we think, well, it's okay now, but say a record is 200 years old and we have those. We want those to be preserved as best as we can so that they're still here 200 years from now.
The book of Deuteronomy speaks about how we should never forget what we have seen or experienced, and that we need to pass it on to our children and our children's children. The beauty of establishing archives and an archival center is that it allows us a venue, an opportunity to tell our story. That's important because if we cease telling our story, we face the risk of becoming irrelevant.
In addition to paper documents, the St. Cyril and Methodius Church archive facility will include a chalice presented to the diocese's second bishop, Emmett Walsh, on the 50th anniversary of his ordination to the priesthood.
So it's from 1966, and the metalwork is exquisite, and his coat of arms is inscribed on it, and the engraving on the bottom says that it's to him.
Other items include postcards from Bishop James Malone from a visit to Rome, along with a ring representing his service on a Vatican council. An electric host maker is also expected to be on display.
Sister whose photograph that you see was an Ursuline sister, and the sisters supplied a host to parishes. So it was a matter of pouring the wheat onto the plate, holding it down, and it was an improvement for them that it was electrified.
Bishop Bonnar is hoping to open the facility to the public at some point in 2025. Although he wants to make sure the timing is right, he says it's indeed an exciting time for our diocese.
We're in the moment, we're always looking forward with joyful hope, but we can never forget that we have a rich past, just an incredible legacy. We stand on the shoulders of so many other people who made great sacrifice, building our churches, contributing to our mission, all for the good of the church.
Coming up on the Catholic Echo podcast, Call and Vote goes one-on-one with Assistant Archivist Hannah Shaw on her role in the new archive facility. Keep it here, much more to come. Did you know that the Catholic Echo magazine is delivered 10 times per year to 52,000 Catholic households in Northeast Ohio? That is more than 150,000 people. And the Catholic Echo website, catholicecho.org, has been averaging 30,000 views per month since it launched in February 2023. Advertise your business, special event, or service with the Catholic Echo in print or online. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org. Advertising discounts are available for Catholic institutions, as well as for businesses that commit to 5 or 10 issues in a year. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org or visit the advertising tab at catholicecho.org for more information.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at catholicecho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
Hello, and welcome back to the Catholic Echo podcast. I'm your host, Colin Vogt, and today I'm joined by our assistant archivist at the diocese, Hannah Shaw. Hannah, thank you for being with us today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
What can you tell us about the Office of Archives here at the diocese? What is kind of your day-to-day like? What's your focus like?
Yeah, so really it varies day to day. The archives are actually required by canon law. Every diocese has to have an archive. Ours was kind of taking a seat back for a little bit. When Bishop Bonnar came, he really wanted to pick it up and get things moving. So right now we have a pretty big backlog of things to process. On a slower day, that's what we would work on. But then there are also other little random projects that pop up. We'll get some donations from people that hear about it and have maybe an uncle that was a priest and they have their collection and stoles and chalices and different things that they want us to preserve. And we're always happy to take donations like that. So then we'll process them and switch gears. Different things like that. You really never know what could pop up in the archives. It sounds like it would be a pretty standard office job, but it's not. It's different every day, different research requests.
It sounds like you're kind of, between the researching and that sort of thing and going back through records. And you mentioned processing. What does that mean exactly for us lay people?
So we have these fancy archival boxes and folders. You really want anything acid-free that isn't going to deteriorate the paper over time. It'll help preserve the longevity of it. Some of our documents go back, when the earlier parishes were founded. So we really want to make sure that they're safe, not subject to any kind of harm, sunlight, things like that. So we'll go through it. We assign things a number. It's called an accession number. we keep track of it all, so that way we know that if we need to find St. Joseph's document, we know it's this number here, and then we're able to pull it from that box and find where it is.
What sorts of things do people generally donate or give to the archives?
We've had a lot of relatives of priests that have kept their belongings for some time after they've passed. Things like that will come to us, and it's usually like a chalice that they had, or sometimes they'll have like a portable communion kit that we'll get that they were keeping, and they understand that it would be safer with us, and people will be able to enjoy it with us a little bit more. So we'll get things like that, or just family documents that they've had. We've had family Bibles come through from the 1800s that might make a good addition in our reading room for people to see.
Do some of these things get like repurposed out into parishes around the diocese for future use? Like you mentioned, like the vestments and communion sets. Are they just kind of preserved for historical purposes?
Yeah, it kind of depends. So if it's a personal donation that someone will give us, we'll preserve it in the archives, because that's typically what they're donating it with the intention to do. We also are involved with when churches are closing, unfortunately. We'll go in and make sure that those objects are preserved. And sometimes that stuff will go to our Office of Patrimony, and then it's redistributed throughout the diocese if it's able to. If there's, a chalice or a baptismal font that might be able to be used elsewhere, we might keep it if it has a strong significance to the parish or the culture of the parish. But if it's able to be reused somewhere else and another parish needs to update something, then yeah, we'll redistribute it if we can.
And what kind of things do you look to redistribute? Like artwork? Is it objects for the liturgy itself? What are some of the things that are reused that people can kind of keep an eye out for?
Really anything like that. We have had some artwork. Some schools have been interested. They need religious artwork for their walls, so they'll call us, and we have some that we have saved from other churches and no one's using, so we're happy to donate it to them and they can use it. We have had some parishes inquire about different, usually like a saint painting, if it's the feast day of Our Lady of Czestochowa and they want to display her.
Mm-hmm.
We can look through our collection and see what we have. And then objects like that, we'll usually ask for them back once the time period has closed. But yeah, we are always happy that if someone else can use something that we have.
That's really cool. And that also makes me think, we did a story, about the Office of Patrimony, as you said. And one cool thing that, I'd like for more people to know about is how a lot of the objects that we have get sent to mission churches overseas, like to Africa and places like that are developing and really need these sorts of objects for their worship ceremonies. I just think that's such an amazing thing to do and lets people remember that we're a global church. Obviously, it's good to have your local community and be focused on that, but just the fact that there's statues and artwork and whatever, objects for the liturgy itself being used in Africa or the Philippines or somewhere like that is so amazing.
Yeah, we're really blessed that we get to play our role in that too. So we'll usually, if it's something we'll take for archives, we'll take it. If not, we'll have our director of patrimony look at it, see if he knows of another parish that might be looking for something like that. And if not, or it's not something that we'll save for that, then it'll pass on to missions and we're able to send it for the most part overseas. So yeah, it is a really special system to be a part of.
Let's talk a little bit about your story and how you came to be the assistant archivist here at the Diocese of Youngstown.
So I attended Youngstown State University. I got my master's in history and a certificate in applied history. And applied history is really like archival studies, museum studies, historic preservation, more of the like hands-on the application of history and what you do with it beyond just your standard research. So I went on an archival track for that. I had an internship actually at another religious institution at a synagogue in Youngstown. In their archives, they had a backlog of things. Theirs were actually in a water closet. So I helped them get that into shape, get it preserved, get it into a much better situation. And it was there that I really got exposed to religious archives. A lot of people don't even think that something like that would exist in a religious institution or really any of the institutions or businesses that have archives. Big brands have archives. There's just all these different realms that, they have records and history that you really want to preserve and make use of for someone else. So that was how I was exposed to practical archive and not just a university archive.
So you're part investigator, part historian, part researcher, sounds like it's never a dull day.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. You're never too sure. I like to think I'm part genealogist too, because we get a ton of research requests of people for their ancestor sacramental records. Those go back to, the beginning of our parishes. I have looked and actually successfully found one from, I think, 1874 might be the earliest one that I have found.
Wow.
And that's always really exciting to do too, because that was before, our counties kept those records or were required to keep those records. So that might be the only way that I was able to figure out that history.
This is an interesting way to kind of view our own history as a nation here in America, is that, we're a nation of immigrants, and Youngstown is a perfect example of that, of people coming from so far away. And yet what is preserved is their Catholic faith, or that precedence is still maintained. Whereas, a lot of times people say, oh yeah, we still have family back in Italy. I know I've heard that like a million times from my parents. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. But, I think it's like you said, that we're part of a history that's 2,000 years old, and it's important to remember that sometimes too. Speaking of all these different roles that the archivist apparently fills, what fascinates you the most about the history of the church in general and about the history of the Diocese of Youngstown?
Yeah, I think I'll hit the history of the church first. I think in my role as an archivist too, and you look at all the different jobs you could have, it's unique with the church because it's so universal, but then at the same time you get these subcategories. So you could talk to someone in Rome or Florida or wherever, and the history of the Catholic Church is the history of the Catholic Church, and you know that. But then when you get into the history of their diocese, just how different it could be, and then just all these little subsets that exist within make it just such a fascinating world. And then of course there's all the different areas that you can go in the history of our church that you don't really get that with different categories of history. At least, you could look at the history of Catholic schools, or like pre or post Vatican II, or how the Catholic Church has responded to pretty much any issue in our society or politics or anything like that that comes up. Our church usually has sort of statement on. When you're researching or finding different things, you could just look at our church architecture if that's what you're interested in. So I think that is really interesting. And as far as the history of our diocese, I've always been really interested in all of our different cultures in this area. All of the national parishes that we have, I think, are just so unique. The architecture is unique. Their art is unique. They're so different. We're also really lucky in our archives that we do have the Catholic exponent files as well. So we're able to find pretty much any topic that we want in there. There's the history on, Bishop Bonnar was really involved in the steel strike. That's one example of a different thing that's unique to our diocese that they didn't have in other dioceses, but they have their own things that they were focused on. So I think just those little categories that pop up, we're really able to make it what we want.
And with all the time that you've spent with all these old records and histories and genealogies and stuff, what's something that you think is really unique or special about the Diocese of Youngstown that you would like to bring some attention to?
Yeah, our different parishes that we had as immigrants came settled in this area, as they were founding their parishes and celebrating Mass in different languages, just how those different things that you can find in the sacramental records are really interesting. I'm lucky that my family was from this area, so I get the connection of my ancestors with these parishes, and their sacramental records are in there, or they're in pictures. It's just interesting.
What I've found in covering the diocese and meeting so many different people and going to so many different parishes and stuff like that, it's funny because, as you say, there's so much diversity within our diocese, but then what I've found is just a constant is this character of resilience and also like just a simplicity. People are very focused on their family, their faith, and their community. And I just find that so beautiful. It's really a affirmation of what are the most important things in life. This area, we've been through some stuff, I can't even say we, I'm an outsider. The Mahoning Valley and all of the, Youngstown area in our diocese has been through many upheavals and difficult times, and yet the faith remains extremely strong. And that's just such a beautiful thing to get to witness and be a part of. So, yeah, I think that's so cool that on the one hand, we have so many different, backgrounds and so many different cultures and everything. And at the same time, this same culture of Catholicism is distributed throughout, and the nature of that is very resilient, very stalwart, and very just focused and simple and beautiful in its simplicity, I find.
I was just going to say, too, and the project I was just researching a couple weeks ago, it kept popping up, all these changes at parishes. And if you look at it, a lot of them either built a new grotto, and that was here in Mahoning County and in Summit County. They built something during the Depression, or when the guys had free time, so they went to their church and built. Or during the steel strike, when a lot of the guys were off work, they painted the whole interior of the church. So it really just shows how important faith is in this area, and how they didn't take it as an excuse to take some time off and relax. They said, no, we're going to go and we're going to paint our church because it needs painted. It shows the priorities, and I think it's really representative of the area.
Last thing, Hannah, that I just wanted to ask you about was, for all of us that work at the diocese, our faith comes into play with what it is that we're doing. And I'm just wondering how, in doing this job, you have a connection with your faith, and does it come up at all in your work? How does it kind of intersect with your faith?
I'll say I don't know directly that it comes up, but I'm sure somebody else would say, no, that is direct, and it is. So to me, I really look at what I do, especially with sacramental record requests or research requests, as a form of evangelization. You get these people that maybe have fallen away from the church, or church isn't even on their radar, it's not on their minds, but they have to call the diocese for their grandparents' baptism record, for their genealogy, So I'm really lucky, I think, that I get to reconnect them with the church. Research requests are so different in that they might not be interested in the church. It might just be that they're looking at when the church was erected down the street. It just reminds me of why I'm doing this and why to always approach it as a matter of faith.
I love that you said that, because, I think that's really something that Pope Francis is calling for all of us to do, is to approach everything that we do as an opportunity for evangelization. And what does he mean by that is not to lecture everyone all the time. What he means is to just demonstrate this joy that we have in what we do, So me being a writer, I try and bring that joy that I have in just putting together a story into, what I do. And I think it's such a powerful reminder to take joy in our work and to bring it as an opportunity to just introduce people back to what that joy is. That's a beautiful way to put it. You've shared with me, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
If you'd like to hear more about the archives at the Diocese of Youngstown, you can always read more about it at thecatholicecho.org.
The Catholic Echo podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Your host has been Dennis Biviano. Have a blessed day, and may God be with you.